"Son, don't do this. I'll give you the money," said the old woman, but the farmer saw and acted. Comment what you thought of this story with a score from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The wheelchair clattered against the uneven stones of the dirt road leading to the Blue Ridge Mountains overlook. Eleanor Vance, at 67, gripped the armrests tightly as she felt. Every jolt travel up a spine, already punished by diabetes and long years of hard work. The cold afternoon Appalachian wind cut across her wrinkled face, bringing with it the scent of the pine trees that dotted the mountainous landscape near Asheville. "Mom, are you okay? Aren't you cold?" asked Ethan, her youngest son of 42, pushing the chair with abrupt movements that betrayed his anxiety. His hands were sweating despite the cool weather, and he avoided looking directly at his mother's face, keeping his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. Eleanor noticed the tension in her son's voice. In the 3 months since he had lost his job at the accounting firm in Charlotte, his visits had become more frequent, but also stranger. Ethan spoke of reconciliation, of cherishing the moments they had left, of leaving arguments behind, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match his sweet words. "I'm fine, my son," she replied, adjusting the wool shawl she had knitted during the long, lonely afternoons in her modest house in downtown Asheville. "It's been so long since I've been here. Your father brought me once, when you all were little." The mention of her deceased husband made Ethan swallow hard. Eleanor had raised her 3 children alone after the accident at the textile mill that took John Vance's life 20 years ago. She had worked as a seamstress, a cleaner, a saleswoman, anything to keep the house and educate Michael, Victoria, and Ethan. Now, widowed and ill, she lived on only her modest pension, but always found a way to help when one of her children was in need. "Look at this beautiful view, Mom," Ethan said, stopping the chair dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. The valley stretched for hundreds of feet below, a green sea of Appalachian forest cut by the silver serpentine of the French Broad River. "Soon we'll be able to see the sunset." Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the wind. There was something about the position of the chair, the way Ethan had placed her, that awakened a primitive instinct of danger. She knew this son well, the most spoiled, the one who always had trouble taking responsibility. In recent months, his visits had a pattern. He would arrive talking about money, about the debts that were piling up, about how life had been unfair to him. "Ethan, could you move the chair back a little from the edge? I'm scared," she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Don't worry, Mum. You're safe with me," he replied. But he didn't move the chair. On the contrary, his hands began to tremble slightly on the wheelchair's handles. During the silence that followed, Eleanor began to connect dots she had previously ignored. The insistent questions about the house, about her few possessions, about her small savings, the pressure for her to sign papers he claimed were just a formality. He said the way he behaved when Michael and Victoria called, always trying to intercept the conversations. "You know, Mom," Ethan began, his voice faltering slightly, "sometimes I think about how much easier it would be if you didn't have to suffer so much. This illness, this dependency, it must be very hard for you." Eleanor's heart went cold. 20 years of raising children alone had taught her to read between the lines, to sense when something was fundamentally wrong. And at that moment, high on the mountain, with the cliff just inches away, she understood with terrifying clarity the true purpose of this reconciliatory outing. "Ethan," she said, her voice firm despite the fear, "what are you thinking of doing?" He didn't answer immediately. His hands tightened further on the chair's handles, and Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from her son like waves of heat. When he finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable, rough and desperate. "Mom, I owe a lot of money to people who don't take excuses. And you have the house, you have the savings. If some accident happened here, such a dangerous place. No, Eleanor murmured, the reality of the situation finally materializing with all its cruelty. You can't be thinking that. I'm your mother. You don't understand. They're going to hurt me if I don't pay. And besides, you're always suffering, aren't you? Always in pain, always depending on others. Maybe it would be better. The words died in his throat as he began to gently push the chair toward the edge. Eleanor felt the front wheels approaching the void and screamed with all the force her lungs could muster. Help! Please, somebody help me! The cry echoed through the Blue Ridge Mountains, cutting the air like a blade. But there, at the isolated top of the overlook, there was no one to hear. Only the wind, the trees, and a son who had chosen the darkest path a human heart can tread. Ethan paused for a moment, looking down at the valley below. His hands were shaking violently now, and tears began to stream down his cheeks. But the pressure from his creditors, the fear of their threats, the vision of the inheritance that would solve all his problems, all of it weighed more than 20 years of maternal love. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I don't see any other way." And it was at that moment, when the wheelchair was just inches from the precipice and Eleanor's fate seemed sealed, that the distant sound of hooves against stones echoed up the mountainside. A white horse appeared on the steep trail like an apparition, its mane flying in the wind as it galloped toward the overlook. Riding it, a man of about 35 wore a blue plaid shirt and faded blue jeans, typical of someone who spent his days working under the sun. Arthur Morgan had gone out to check on the cattle grazing on the slopes when he heard the desperate cry, echoing through the valley. "What's going on here?" he shouted, pulling on the reins to stop the horse a few feet from the wheelchair. Ethan froze, his hand still gripping his mother's chair. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he tried to process the unexpected interruption. Eleanor, for her part, felt a wave of relief so intense she almost fainted. "Please, help me," she cried, stretching her arms toward the stranger. "My son, he wants to... It's nothing, sir," Ethan interrupted quickly, forcing a nervous smile. "My mother is afraid of heights. We were just leaving." Arthur dismounted with agility, his brown eyes scanning the scene carefully. Something was deeply wrong here. The wheelchair was positioned dangerously close to the cliff, the elderly woman was visibly terrified, and the younger man showed all the signs of someone caught doing something they shouldn't. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Arthur asked, approaching slowly so as not to startle anyone. "No, I'm not all right," Eleanor answered with a trembling but determined voice. "My son brought me here with bad intentions. He wants to harm me." "Mom, you're delusional because of your medication," Ethan said, trying to maintain control, but his voice betrayed his desperation. "Let's go home now." Arthur had grown up on a farm and developed a keen instinct for dangerous situations. He noted how Ethan avoided eye contact, how his hands trembled, how he positioned himself between him and the woman in the wheelchair. Everything indicated the woman was telling the truth. "Why don't we first move the chair away from the edge?" Arthur suggested, taking a step forward. "It's dangerous to leave someone so close to the precipice." "You don't need to get involved, man," Ethan retorted, a note of aggression rising in his voice. "This is a family matter. When it's about someone in danger, it becomes any decent person's business," Arthur replied, his voice firm but controlled. At that moment, Eleanor made a courageous decision. With all the strength she could muster, she firmly gripped the wheelchair's brakes and shouted, "He wants to push me. He said it would be better if I died. Please, don't let him hurt me." The confirmation of his suspicions lit something in Arthur's eyes. Without hesitation, he moved quickly toward the chair. Ethan, in a panic, tried to finish what he had started, pushing the chair hard toward the abyss. But Arthur was faster. His strong hands grabbed the chair by its side supports, locking it in place. Ethan's push caused him to lose his balance, stumbling backward as Arthur pulled Eleanor away from danger. "It's okay. It's all okay now," he murmured, kneeling beside the chair and looking into the frightened woman's eyes. "No one is going to hurt you." Ethan got up, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and terror. "You don't know anything. You don't know what I'm going through. They'll break my legs if I don't get the money." "That doesn't justify what you were about to do," Arthur said, placing himself protectively between Eleanor and her son. "She's your mother. A mother who only brought me problems. An old house, a miserable inheritance, endless medical bills." Ethan exploded, all his frustration and despair pouring out at once. "You people don't understand what it's like to live as a failure, owing money to dangerous people." Eleanor closed her eyes, each of her son's words like a stab wound. 20 years of sacrifice, of working 2 jobs to support the family, of giving up her own dreams to educate her children, all reduced to problems in Ethan's distorted mind. "If you're in debt, there are other ways to solve it," Arthur said. "But what you were thinking of doing is unforgivable." "Other ways? You think I haven't tried?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "I lost everything gambling, Mr. Hero, everything, and these guys don't take promises." Arthur felt a mixture of pity and revulsion. He recognized the genuine desperation in Ethan's voice, but it didn't diminish the monstrosity of what he had tried to do. He looked at Eleanor, who was now crying silently, and felt his determination strengthen. "Where do you live, Mom?" "Eleanor Vance," she replied between sobs. "I live in downtown Asheville, on Main Street. And is there anyone else in the family who can help you?" "I have 2 other children who live far away. Michael is in Knoxville and Victoria is in Raleigh, but I haven't spoken to them properly in months." Ethan, realizing his situation had become untenable, began to back away. "Look, this was just a misunderstanding. My mother is confused because of her age. I'll take her home now." "No," Eleanor said with a firmness that surprised everyone. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Ethan. Not ever again." "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm more serious than I've ever been in my life," she replied, facing her son with a mixture of pain and determination. "You crossed a line that has no return." Ethan looked around, calculating his options. Arthur was clearly prepared to stop him physically if necessary, and his mother had publicly turned against him. In a moment of cowardice that would define the rest of his life, he made the worst possible decision. "Then fend for yourselves," he yelled, running toward the car he had left parked at the start of the trail. "I'm not coming. Back!" The sound of the engine starting and the car speeding away echoed through the mountain, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Eleanor watched her son leave without a backward glance, feeling as if a part of her heart died in that moment. "Mrs. Vance," Arthur said softly, crouching again beside the chair. "Do you have a place to go tonight?" She shook her head negatively. "The house is in the names of all 3 children. Ethan has the spare keys. After what happened here, I don't feel safe going back alone." Arthur thought for a moment, observing the suffering-marked face of the woman before him. His farm was just a few miles away, at the base of the mountain. He lived alone since losing his adoptive parents, and there was plenty of space in the main house. "I have a farm nearby," he said finally. "There's a room on the ground floor that would be suitable for you. You can stay there until we sort things out with your other children." Eleanor looked at this stranger who had saved her life, trying to process the unexpected kindness. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. My name is Arthur Morgan. I raise dairy cattle and grow corn at the Santa Clara farm, and you've just been through the worst experience anyone can imagine. I'm not going to leave you alone now." Tears returned to Eleanor's eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Arthur smiled for the first time since he had arrived at the Overlook. "My adoptive mother taught me that helping those in need isn't a favor. It's an obligation. And besides," he paused, looking at the valley where the sun was beginning to set, "we all deserve to have someone who cares about us." The Santa Clara farm stretched across the gentle hills of the region, with verdant pastures where dairy cattle grazed peacefully under the golden light of dusk. Arthur guided his horse slowly along the dirt road, keeping a careful pace so as not to shake the wheelchair too much, which he had managed to fit into his old pickup truck. Eleanor watched the landscape through the window, still trying to process the traumatic events of the last few hours. "The house is just up ahead," Arthur said, pointing to a single-story, white-painted, colonial-style building with blue windows and a wide porch decorated with pots of begonias. "It belonged to my adoptive parents. They passed away 5 years ago." "You were adopted?" Eleanor asked, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her state of shock. "When I was 2, the Morgan family found me in an orphanage in Knoxville and gave me a life I could have never dreamed of." Arthur paused, a shadow of sadness crossing his eyes. "They were the best parents anyone could have." When they arrived at the house, Arthur helped her transfer from the truck to the wheelchair, demonstrating a surprising gentleness for someone with hands calloused by rural work. The main living room was simple but welcoming, with dark wood furniture, handmade rugs, and family photographs scattered on the walls. "The room I was thinking of for you is right here," he said, pushing the chair down the hallway. "It has an accessible bathroom and is close to the kitchen." The room was spacious and bright, with a single bed, an antique dresser, and a window overlooking the backyard garden. Eleanor noticed that everything was impeccably clean, as if Arthur had been preparing to receive someone special. "It's perfect," she murmured, tears threatening to return. "But I can't stay for long. I don't want to be a burden to you." "You're no burden at all," Arthur replied firmly, "and you can stay as long as you need." That first night, Eleanor could barely sleep. Ethan's cruel words echoed in her mind, mixed with the memory of the murderous look she saw in the eyes of the son she had raised with so much love. How had it come to this? Where had she gone wrong in his upbringing? Arthur also spent the night awake, sitting on the porch, watching the stars and reflecting on the responsibility he had taken on. His adoptive sister, Isabella, would not be happy when she found out he had brought a stranger home. She had always been jealous of the attention he received from their parents, and even after their death, she maintained a possessive control over family decisions. The next morning, Arthur prepared a simple breakfast: biscuits, fresh farm cheese from his own farm, and freshly brewed coffee. Eleanor ate little, still shaken, but she couldn't help but notice the care with which he had prepared everything. "Did you learn to cook from your adoptive mother?" she asked, trying to make normal conversation. "I learned on my own, actually. After they were gone, I had to fend for myself." Arthur poured her more coffee. "My sister Isabella lives in Asheville, but well, we've never had a very close relationship." It was as if he had summoned a storm. At 10 in the morning, the sound of a car braking sharply in the yard announced the arrival of Isabella Morgan, a 38-year-old woman with black hair, pulled into a severe bun and a permanently irritated expression. She stormed into the house like a hurricane, completely ignoring Eleanor in her wheelchair. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? Tony from the bar told me you brought some strange old woman home." "Isabella, please," Arthur tried, clearly embarrassed. "This is Mrs. Vance. She needed help. And you thought our house was a charity hotel," Isabella interrupted, her words cutting through the air like blades. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Eleanor tried to shrink into her chair, feeling like an intruder. "Maybe I should go," she murmured. "No, Arthur said firmly, placing himself between the two women. Mrs. Vance has been through a terrible situation. She's staying here as long as she needs to. Terrible situation? What situation? Isabella scoffed. I bet she's just another freeloader trying to take advantage of our kindness. The accusation was like a slap in the face to Eleanor. For over 20 years, she had worked hard to support her family, sacrificing her own dreams for her children's sake. To be called a freeloader by a stranger stirred an indignation she hadn't felt in a long time. Listen here, young lady, Eleanor said, straightening up in her chair and facing Isabella directly. I've been working since I was 14. I raised 3 children on my own after my husband died. I've never asked anyone for anything, and I'm not about to start now. The unexpectedly firm response surprised Isabella, who had expected to find a frail and submissive old woman. Then why are you here? Because yesterday my own son tried to kill me, Eleanor said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. And your brother saved me. The silence that followed was tense and heavy. Arthur watched Isabella's expression change from irritation to confusion and finally to an even greater suspicion. That's ridiculous, Isabella said finally. A son doesn't do that to his mother. You'd be surprised what people do when they're desperate, Eleanor replied bitterly. In the days that followed, a strange routine was established at Santa Clara Farm. Arthur would leave early to tend to the cattle and crops, always leaving coffee ready for Eleanor. She, in turn, began to slowly explore the house in her wheelchair, discovering details about the life of the man who had saved her. The photographs in the living room told the story of a loving family. A young Arthur being hugged by a smiling middle-aged couple, graduations, celebrations, happy moments that were now just memories. Eleanor noticed that Isabella appeared in few photos, and when she did, she always had a serious and distant expression. On the 4th night since her arrival, Arthur found Eleanor on the porch, watching the stars. She had managed to maneuver the chair there on her own, demonstrating an independence he hadn't yet noticed. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting in a rocking chair beside her. "I've been thinking too much," Eleanor admitted. "About Ethan, about how I got to this point, about what I'm going to do now." "Have you tried contacting your other children?" Eleanor sighed deeply. "Michael and Victoria. The relationship was never easy. After they grew up and left home, the visits became rarer and rarer. I think they see me as a burden, an obligation." "Maybe it's time to try again," Arthur suggested gently. "What if they react like Ethan? What if they find out I'm here and think I'm a freeloader, like your sister said?" Arthur was silent for a moment, observing how the moonlight illuminated Eleanor's tired face. There was something about her that awakened a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years, perhaps since the death of his adoptive mother. "You know what impresses me about you?" he said finally. "What?" "After everything you've been through, you still worry about not bothering others. You still have hope that people will do the right thing." Eleanor smiled for the first time since she arrived at the farm. "My mother used to say that losing faith in human kindness was worse than losing everything else." She was a wise woman. She was. It's a shame I won't have the chance to pass that on. My grandchildren barely know me. That night, after Eleanor had gone to sleep, Arthur made a decision that would change everything. He picked up the phone and dialed Isabella, who answered on the 3rd ring with evident irritation. "What do you want at this hour?" "I need you to help me find Mrs. Vance's children," he said without preamble. "Michael and Victoria Vance. One lives in Knoxville and the other in Raleigh." "Arthur, have you gone completely insane? You're going to drag our family into someone else's problems." "They're not someone else's problems when a decent person is suffering. And this woman is decent, Isabella. You'd know that if you could stop being jealous for one minute." The line was silent for a few seconds. When Isabella spoke again, her voice was filled with a cold anger that Arthur recognized from childhood. "Jealous? You think I'm jealous of some crippled old woman? I'm trying to protect our family from freeloaders." "Our family," Arthur repeated, a dangerous note rising in his voice. "You mean the family you never bothered to visit when our parents were sick? The family you only remember when you want something?" The silence that followed was icy. Arthur knew he had crossed a line, but he didn't regret it. Years of repressed resentment had finally found an outlet. "You're going to regret this," Isabella said finally, her voice low and threatening. "You're going to find out who this woman really is. And when you do, don't come crying to me." The line went dead, leaving Arthur alone with his worries and the growing certainty that the trouble was just beginning. 2 weeks after Isabella's veiled threat, Arthur woke to the sound of cars arriving in the farm's yard. Through his bedroom window, he saw a silver sedan and a white SUV parking near the main house. His heart raced as he realized they weren't neighbors. The license plates were from out of state. Eleanor was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard raised voices outside. Through the window, she could see 2 adults walking toward the front door with serious expressions. Even from a distance, something about their silhouettes was disturbingly familiar. "Arthur!" a male voice shouted from the porch. "We know you're in there! We want our mother back!" Eleanor's blood ran cold. It was the voice of Michael, her eldest son. But there was something in the tone, an aggressiveness that made her instinctively back away with her wheelchair. Arthur hurried downstairs and found Eleanor in the kitchen, her face pale with terror. "It's them, isn't it?" he asked softly. "Michael and Victoria," she confirmed, her voice trembling. "But they didn't come here out of concern. I know that tone. It's the same one they used when they fought over their father's inheritance." The front door burst open violently before Arthur could reach it. Michael Vance, 45, stormed into the house with the authority of someone who felt entitled. Behind him, Victoria, 40, looked around with poorly disguised contempt. "Where is she?" Michael demanded, completely ignoring Arthur. "Where is our mother?" "I'm right here," Eleanor said, appearing at the kitchen entrance in her wheelchair. "And you weren't invited in." Victoria was the first to speak, her voice laden with feigned outrage. "Mum, what are you doing in a stranger's house? Isabella told us this man took advantage of a vulnerable old woman." "Isabella," Arthur murmured, the betrayal cutting deep. His sister had kept her promise. "That's right," Michael continued, pointing an accusatory finger at Arthur. "We found out you were kidnapped by this man after Ethan tried to take you for an outing." A fury Eleanor hadn't felt in decades rose in her chest. "Kidnapped? Ethan tried to kill me and this man saved my life." "Mom, please," Victoria said condescendingly. "We know you're confused. Ethan told us you had an episode that you became paranoid." "Ethan lied to you!" Eleanor exploded. "He took me to a cliff to push me off. He wanted my inheritance to pay off gambling debts." "That's ridiculous," Michael retorted. "Ethan might have his problems, but he would never do that. And besides," he looked directly at Arthur, "what kind of man takes advantage of a situation like this to seduce an elderly woman?" The accusation was like a punch to Arthur's gut. "I didn't seduce anyone. I just offered shelter to someone who needed it." "Of course," Victoria sneered. "And I bet you've already gotten access to her bank account, haven't you?" Eleanor rolled her chair forward, placing herself between Arthur and her children. "Stop it! Arthur has never asked me for a single penny. He saved my life and has treated me with more dignity than the 3 of you combined in years." "Mom, you're clearly being manipulated," Michael insisted. "We've come to take you to a safe place." "Safe?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Where? You barely called me for months. When was the last time you visited my house? When was the last time you asked if I needed anything?" The awkward silence that followed was telling. Victoria and Michael exchanged glances, clearly having no answer to their mother's questions. "That doesn't matter now," Victoria said finally. "What matters is that you come with us." "And what if I don't want to?" Eleanor asked defiantly. "Then we'll have to take legal action," Michael threatened. "You are clearly the victim of psychological abuse." It was at that moment that Arthur made a decision that would change everything. He silently left the room and returned 5 minutes later, carrying a folder of documents. Eleanor watched him with curiosity as he spread papers across the kitchen table. "What is this?" Michael asked suspiciously. "The truth," Arthur replied. "Documents I found when I was organizing my adoptive family's belongings after they passed away." Eleanor approached the table, and her eyes widened when she saw the certificates and photographs spread out. One photo in particular took her breath away. A young woman holding a baby, standing next to a woman she immediately recognized as herself, 20 years younger. "My God," she whispered, picking up the photograph with trembling hands. "This is me, and this young woman. Her name is Maria Sanchez," Arthur said softly. "She worked at the same textile mill as your husband. She was single, only 18 when she got pregnant. You helped her during her pregnancy." The memories came flooding back to Eleanor like a torrent. Maria, the shy girl who worked in the fabric section, the shared lunches, the conversations about an uncertain future, the support during the difficult moments of her pregnancy. "She couldn't afford to raise the baby," Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And you helped her find an adoptive family. The documents show you served as a witness in the adoption process." Michael and Victoria watched the scene without fully understanding, but Eleanor began to connect the dots with crystal clarity. "The baby," she murmured. "It was me," Arthur confirmed. "You helped Maria give me to the Morgan family. In a way, you were responsible for me having the wonderful life I had." Tears flowed freely down Eleanor's face. "That's why you seemed familiar from the first moment. That's why I felt this connection." "Maria left a letter," Arthur said, handing her a yellowed envelope. "She wrote about you, about how you were the only person who treated her with kindness during her pregnancy, how you became the older sister she never had." Eleanor opened the letter with reverence and read aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "Eleanor was my salvation during the most difficult time of my life. She showed me that giving my son up for adoption wasn't abandonment, but love. If one day Arthur wants to know his story, tell him about the woman who taught me the meaning of true maternal kindness." The silence in the kitchen was profound. Michael and Victoria were visibly shaken, finally understanding that they had misjudged the entire situation. "Mom," Victoria said, her voice small and regretful. We didn't know." "You didn't know because you were never interested in really knowing who I am," Eleanor replied, but without bitterness. "You only see me as the mother who raised you, but I had a whole life before that. I helped people. I made a difference in the world." Arthur knelt beside Eleanor's chair. "Now I understand why I felt this immediate need to protect you. It wasn't a coincidence that we met. It was fate completing a circle." In the months that followed, life at Santa Clara Farm was completely transformed. Eleanor not only recovered physically, but flourished emotionally. She taught Arthur traditional Southern recipes, helped reorganize the farm's finances with her experience as a homemaker, and brought a maternal warmth he had never fully experienced. Michael and Victoria, ashamed of their behavior, began to visit regularly, gradually rebuilding their relationship with their mother. Ethan, on the other hand, was never heard from again, lost in his own destructive choices. Isabella, surprisingly, was the most impacted by the revelation. Discovering that Eleanor had been instrumental in the creation of the family she valued so much, forced her to re-examine her own prejudices and jealousy. 6 months after the rescue at the Overlook, in a simple ceremony at the Asheville courthouse, Eleanor officially adopted Arthur as her son through the adult adoption process. It was a legal recognition of something that had already become an emotional reality. They were family in the truest sense of the word. On Christmas Eve, sitting on the farm's porch and watching the valley illuminated by the full moon, Eleanor finally found the words to express what she felt. "You know, Arthur, I always believed I had raised 3 children. Now I realize I actually raised 4. You just needed a little more time to come home." Arthur smiled, taking his adoptive mother's fragile hand. "And I always thought I had lost my family when my parents passed. Now I know that family isn't just about who raises you, but about who chooses to stay by your side." The gentle Blue Ridge Mountain wind brought the scent of the flowers from the garden Eleanor tended with such care, mixed with the smell of homemade bread baking for the next day's breakfast. There, on that farm that had become a true home, 2 wounded souls had found and healed each other, proving that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its greatest tragedies. Santa Clara Farm was never the same. It was no longer just a place where a lonely man raised cattle. It had transformed into a home where the genuine love between a mother and son flourished in its purest form, where past and present met in perfect harmony, and where 2 people whom fate had separated early in life finally found their way back to each other. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.